I think just about everyone here knows that I used to be a lawyer in my previous career. You might think I have some affinity for a passage like this that describes a trial. And certainly there are some things here that look familiar. But I have to say, it mostly just pisses me off. Because I became a lawyer because the ideal of justice is important to me. It's one of the things I love about my God. He is the only one who always delivers justice. And this is not justice. We are looking at the account of Stephen. It runs all the way from Acts chapter 6 verse 8 to chapter 8 verse 3. But in that, my focus is going to be on Stephen's statement in defence, which, in itself is a long passage. It takes up almost all of chapter 7. But I think it's really important that we look at the speech Stephen gives to justify his faith. And it is a fascinating passage, just academically. Stephen talks a lot about the history of Israel. He's reciting their origin story. So the stories Stephen chooses and the way he tells them can teach us a lot about which events were most important to the Jewish national identity, the Jews' understanding of themselves as a people and a nation. But this is a sermon, not a lecture. For us, there are more important questions. Because in our series, we've seen hostility in the book of Acts. We've seen some persecution. The apostles were arrested, tried, and flogged. But that was only ever in general terms. It was only ever a summary. Don't preach in Jesus' name. Here we get specific charges, and Stephen defends himself against those charges. So what we have here is an early example, probably really the earliest extended example of apologetics. And in case you're not used to that word, it's a piece of Christian jargon. Apologetics comes from the Greek word apologia, where we get our apology from, but it just means defense. This is Stephen's defense of his faith. Would it be easier for me to switch mics, Pete? Keep going. All right. And we can learn from Stephen's example. It is still very relevant, not because we face the same sorts of persecution, but because there are still, and look, will probably always be, many people who condemn Christianity not based on a genuine consideration of the evidence, but because they have misunderstood the evidence, because they have uncritically accepted false evidence, or in some instances because they're acting in bad faith and don't need any evidence at all. We need to know how to respond. The question we need to consider this morning is this: when we have the opportunity, and I frame it that way deliberately, these are challenging circumstances. Stephen is on trial for his life, but it is also an opportunity. When we have the opportunity, how should we defend our faith? What principles should we keep in mind? To begin though, let's go back a step. Who is Stephen? Well, we first meet Stephen in Acts chapter 6, verse 5, where he is one of the men appointed as the first deacons of the Jerusalem church. So he's a servant of the church. That's what the word deacon means. He is appointed to help oversee the distribution of food. And out of those first group of deacons, Stephen is specifically singled out as a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit. And then just a few verses later, at the start of our passage, he is a man full of God's grace and power. I mean, wow, right? Among a very select crew, he is another step again. It is impressive, seriously impressive. Stephen is being put forward almost as a paragon of Christian life. And we're told that Stephen is empowered by God. And from that power, he performs great wonders and signs, deeds that have previously been associated only with Jesus and the apostles. And when the apostles did it, it inspired the high priest's jealousy. Here it attracts opposition from the synagogue of the freedmen, Jews of Cyrene and Alexandria, as well as the provinces of Cilicia and Asia. And depending on how you read that last bit, it could refer to anywhere between 1 and 5 different groups of Jewish opponents, but that's really not the point. The point is that this overall group opposed Stephen, argued with him, and having been convincingly defeated, resorted to dirty tricks. From chapter 6, verse 11, they secretly persuaded some men to say, "We have heard Stephen speak blasphemous words against Moses and against God." So they stirred up the people and the elders and the teachers of the law. They seized Stephen and brought him before the Sanhedrin. They produced false witnesses who testified, "This fellow never stops speaking against this holy place and against the law, for we have heard him say that this Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place and change the customs Moses handed down to us." Those are the charges. Blasphemy. Blasphemy against Moses, against God, against the temple, and against the law. We don't get a lot of detail, but we do get clear charges. And if you know the Gospels, you can kind of see how these things might have come about. Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple. When he was speaking to his disciples, he said, "Not one brick will be left standing upon another." At another time, speaking to a group of Jews, he said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Twist that just a little bit. Doesn't take much. Twist it just a little bit, and you can see how something like this might come about. Jesus claimed to have authority to interpret the law of Moses, which to us is just second nature. It's a given. He's the Son of God. He is God. Of course he has authority to interpret the law. But to the Jewish authorities, that was a real threat. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that he came to fulfill the law, not abolish it. But the Sadducees, the Pharisees, all of those, they didn't see it that way. Jesus was a revolutionary. He was dangerous. So the charges are understandable, but they were false. Very clearly false. We're specifically told the testimony against Stephen was made up. Stephen, on the other hand, we're told, has a face like the face of an angel. And in the Bible, that's almost always a clear sign of an encounter with God. You might think of Moses coming out of the tent of meeting, having met with God face to face, and his face is shining. All Israel can see that he has been with the Lord. In our modern slang, we might say something similar about a child who looks particularly pure and innocent. They are what an angel. But it seems that looking innocent and being blessed by God doesn't get Stephen off the hook. The high priest very bluntly puts the charges to him. He just says, "Are these charges true?" Inviting Stephen to respond, and away he goes for nearly 50 verses. And I'm not going to go into all of that in detail. There's just too much. And I think to a lot of you, a lot of this will be familiar. If you know the Old Testament stories, you've heard some of this before. Just as an overview, Stephen is telling God's story. He's telling God's story of the creation of Israel and the salvation of Israel, starting with God's call to Abraham in Genesis 12. The call and the covenant. Come out, come to this land that I have called you to. You're not going to stay here, not now. It says in the text, not even a foot of land. Your descendants will go away from here for 400 years. They will be oppressed, they will be enslaved. But they will come out and worship me here. This land will be theirs. This is a promise. And that promise becomes the basis of a covenant. And the covenant is secured. No, secured is the wrong word. The covenant is marked in the very bodies of these people by the sign of circumcision. So there's all of these things. That's the starting point, right? That's the origin of Israel. And then from one end of Genesis to the other, we get to the story of Joseph, the famine in Canaan, Jacob's journey to Egypt. 400 years pass. God's promise was coming true. But now it's time to leave. And that brings us to Moses. Now, God's the hero. This is God's story. But apart from God, Moses is the main figure. I don't know if you were paying close attention as Sasha was reading for us there, but we go from the circumstances of Moses' birth, the events that lead to his exile in Midian, God's call to return to Egypt, the Exodus, and the congregation of Israel in the wilderness. And that takes us all the way from verse 17 to verse 44. And it includes this key verse, verse 38. He, that's Moses, was in the assembly in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai and with our ancestors, and he received living words to pass on to us. Now, those living words were God's law. I'm going to come back to this, but just think for a moment, because you remember what the charges are? The charges are blasphemy against Moses, against God, against the temple, and against the law. We haven't got to the temple yet, but Stephen is saying very clearly, this is God's story. This is the Lord, Yahweh, the God of Israel. In all of this, his chief servant is Moses. And he speaks very highly of Moses. And then he comes here to the law and he puts it at the center of his defense. These are the living words of God. Stephen is refuting the charges with some very, very orthodox statements. I don't know if you recognize the language, but some of these come word for word from Exodus. And that wouldn't be unusual, by the way. Learning these stories was a large part of a Jewish child's education. Both boys and girls were expected to learn this. Boys especially were expected to recite large portions of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, of the law, from memory at their bar mitzvah, when they turned 13 and were recognized as an adult. You were expected to memorize this, so you would be reciting, as Stephen is, the history of Israel. This is good Orthodox Jewish behavior. So far, so good. Stephen's answering the charges. Maybe he'll get off. But these verses also contain the seed of Stephen's complaint, because he's not just defending himself. You see that? He's not just defending himself. Verse 38 is central to Stephen's defense. The law is the living words of God. But look at the verses either side of it. Verse 37, this is the Moses who told the Israelites, God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your own people. Now, who do you suppose that is? Anyone? Jesus. Moses himself anticipated the coming of Jesus, the very Jesus who the high priest and Sanhedrin reject. Verse 39, but our ancestors refused to obey Moses. Instead, they rejected him and in their hearts turned back to Egypt. Now that's undeniably true, right? That's part of Israel's story. It's part of the story that the high priest and the Sanhedrin, they all know it. It's part of their story too. I guess if you came to it, if you challenged them on this, those same people would say, well, they made that mistake. In the wilderness, in that time with Moses, they made that mistake. We know better. We know better. We wouldn't do it like that now. But just by bringing it up, Stephen reminds his audience, it is possible to get it wrong. It is possible to be the chosen people of God and still get it wrong. Stephen is introducing uncertainty. He's undermining his audience's self-righteousness. And then we have another couple of ambiguous episodes. From that key verse, verse 39, Stephen goes on to describe the story of the golden calf. That has got to be one of the low points in Israel's history. surely. They're at Mount Sinai. Moses is up on the mountain in the very presence of God, receiving the law, and they go, well, he's been gone a while, we're not sure what to do. Can you make an idol for us? We have to worship something, and we don't know what's happened to him, so, here's our jewellery, make a calf. What? It's horrifying behaviour. It's idolatry in the very presence of God. They make an idol and they worship it. And Stephen goes on from that to quote, they just say the book of the prophet. That's the prophet Amos, in case you're interested. It's Amos the prophet. So that's hundreds of years later. It's not just that Israel committed idolatry once. There's a pattern of idolatry, and that pattern led to exile. So Stephen's not just defending himself. There's a problem here. And now we get to verses 44 to 47. Stephen brings up the tent of testimony, or the tent of witness. You might know that as the tabernacle from the Old Testament stories. Israel's possession, their conquest of the promised land. David, who enjoyed God's favour, and Solomon, who built the temple. And if you look closely, the focus in that whole section is the tabernacle and the temple. The place where God dwelled with his people. And that's great, right? Surely that's a good thing. These are more high points in the history of Israel, except see where Stephen lands. See what he concludes with. However, the Most High does not live in houses made by human hands. As the prophet says, heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. What kind of house will you build for me, says the Lord? Or where will my resting place be? Has not my hand made all these things? You remember that one of the charges was speaking against the temple? Well, Stephen doesn't speak against the temple, but he does remind his audience that God isn't limited by the temple. The Most High does not live in houses made by human hands. The high priests, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, that is a big deal. Because like the Israelites before them, they have come to put their trust not in God, but in the temple. Their authority as high priest, as chief priests, teachers of the law, scribes, all of that, it comes from their custody and possession of the temple. That's the source of their authority. Stephen is saying implicitly here, God doesn't need you. God can work in other ways. So it's a very uncomfortable conclusion. But it's still one that is true. Provably, demonstrably true, because Stephen is quoting Isaiah chapter 66, verses 1 and 2. The Sanhedrin, the court, cannot contradict him. And now we get to the good bit. Hear it again. You stiff-necked people, your hearts and ears are still uncircumcised. You are just like your ancestors. You always resist the Holy Spirit. Was there ever a prophet your ancestors did not persecute? They even killed those who predicted the coming of the righteous one, and now you have betrayed and murdered him. You who have received the law that was given through angels, but have not obeyed it. Yikes! I look at this and I wonder where Stephen's instinct for self-preservation is. Out the window. No compromise, no surrender. I spoke a couple of weeks ago about the apostles' boldness. This isn't bold, this is confrontational. And you'd have to say it looks deliberate. 49 verses of build-up, 3 verses of bam! Hard truths and fiery accusation. The righteous one, you might have seen that in verse 52. That's an unusual title. but the meaning is clear enough. You murdered the Messiah. You broke God's holy law. And not surprisingly, that provokes a strong reaction. But what I want us to focus on is not the reaction. I want us to think about what Stephen was actually doing here, because there are some important principles we can draw on. Not, hopefully, when we get dragged into court, but for those times when we have to defend what we believe. And we should be ready to do that. I haven't mentioned it yet, but hopefully just in thinking about this context, this will have come up for some of you. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Always be prepared to answer everyone who asks. That is why we have to have our defense, our apologetics ready. So, what can we learn from Stephen? Principle 1. Answer lies with the truth, or just speak the truth. There is no room in your defense, in apologetics, or in evangelism for that matter, for any kind of lies, manipulation, or dishonesty. If you lie, even with the greater goal of winning people to Christ, it will come out. It will have consequences. That should be a given. God is the God of truth. The devil is the father of lies. But we do need to keep it in mind, because people will often be grappling with false impressions or misinformation about Christianity. And the only way to cut through is by being honest. Stephen's opponents had brought false witnesses against him. He answers with the truth. And it's interesting to see how he goes about it. He starts with the stuff everyone can agree with. He starts where there is no question about the truthfulness of what he's saying, with the stories of Abram and Joseph and Moses. He's building common ground with his audience. These are our stories. These are the things all of us hold to be true. And then when Stephen gets to the more controversial stuff, he makes greater use of statements that cannot be denied. Did you notice the two places in his defense where Stephen directly quotes from the Bible, when he quotes from the Old Testament scriptures, when he's talking about Israel's idolatry, and when he calls into question the high priest's understanding of the temple, the true nature of God's dwelling. So he backs that up with authority that his audience accepts. It's only at the very end does Stephen start with the true stuff that they will disagree with, the stuff they violently disagree with. So, speak the truth, build common ground, support your argument with sources your audience accepts, build a reputation for honesty. And then when you need to speak out, because that time will come, if you've done these things, you are more likely to be heard. Also, just, hopefully this is obvious, but speaking the truth, first of all, you have to know the truth. So spend time in the Bible. Spend time in God's Word. You will come across all sorts of people who will condemn Christianity without having read an iota, a single word of the Bible. They rely only on what they have received. You cannot be that person. To answer with the truth, you have to know it. And that starts with God's Word. And also, look, there are an enormous range of resources out there. The Gideon's training, Alpha. There are a lot of ways we can be equipped with answers for some of the most common questions. And that's important because principle 2 is remove the obstacles that can be removed. Remember the charges against Stephen? Blaspheming against Moses, against God, against the temple, and against the law. And some of those are simple to answer, so Stephen answers. He shows that God is the covenantal God of Israel, the promise maker, the the promise keeper, the one who saves his people, delivers them from slavery in Egypt. There is no blasphemy here. He gives Moses his due. Moses is the honoured servant of God. The law, he says, consists of the living words of God. The temple is more complicated because the high priests and the members of the Sanhedrin have made almost a kind of idol from the temple. It's distracting them from the truth of God. But Stephen never speaks directly against the temple, only against their false understanding of it. So he's answering. He's getting those blocks that have been put up and he's taking them out of the way. Now, one thing that I just want to point out here, remember this is an apology, it's a defense. Unlike our adversarial courtrooms, the places I used to work, apologetics doesn't have to be punchy and defensive. I know Stephen gets stuck in at the end here. He does get pretty, confrontational. But we don't have to go that way. I think I've put up the quote there from 1 Peter. Speak with gentleness and respect. I was taught apologetics by Brian Harris at Moreland College, and he used to speak of it as removing obstacles. That's the principle that I've put there. Getting rid of the things that trip people up and get in their way. The unnecessary stuff. Maybe someone has concerns about the reliability of the Bible, or the evidence for the resurrection, or even the amount of violence in the Old Testament. You can learn to answer all of those. And as you do, you're smoothing the way so that people can come to the claims Jesus makes about himself and see them fairly, not coloured by their preconceptions. Also, while we're on this issue of removing obstacles, that also means don't make more. Don't make more. Don't make it harder for people. Don't, by your conduct, set up more barriers, making it harder for people to see that Jesus is good. When Christians are hypocritical, when we act in an unloving manner, when we sin, we can actually make it harder for people to come to that point of deciding for Christ. And that is just, it's a tragedy. I don't even know how to put it strongly enough. It's disastrous. You're hoping that this person will be saved, and you're making that harder. They're drowning, and you're throwing buckets of water in their face. Don't do it. Don't do it. The other thing that comes out of that, though, is that removing obstacles, it does not mean compromising the good news of Jesus. The starting point is still answering with the truth, and that means not every obstacle can be removed. Instead, you're making it easier for people to consider the obstacles that really matter. One of those is Jesus' claim to be the only Saviour. People really don't like the fact that Jesus claims to be the exclusive path. I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In the same way, you cannot get rid of the offence of the cross. That perceived unfairness that we cannot earn our salvation. It's only something that we accept from God. Those are obstacles that people have to come to, and that God has to help them with. Apologetics can help people reach the point of decision, but it's the Holy Spirit working in them that helps them get over that last hurdle. And that's why Stephen is so blunt. When he makes his closing remarks, he is so uncompromising because he needs the Sanhedrin to see they have a problem. They think the law will save them, but they haven't kept it. Jesus alone is the righteous one, and they murdered him. They are still opposing the Holy Spirit. So the third principle, which applies to apologetics and evangelism, is confront people with the truth of Jesus. Never apologize for Jesus. Never apologize for the cross. Stephen, though, his conduct is faultless. He hasn't done anything wrong. He has spoken the truth. He's answered the charges as best he can. He's brought his accusers face to face with their need for a saviour. And that's where he stops. Because at that point, the work of apologetics is done. You cannot force anyone to become a Christian. At that point, we leave it with God and trust him to help. We just pray. That's it. That's my main point, okay? I just want us to learn from Stephen's defence, to see the principles there that we can apply in our own lives and when we are called on to give a defence for our faith. There's a lot of other stuff I'd like to say about this passage. Time doesn't really allow, about how Stephen is murdered. He's not executed, he's murdered. This is an unlawful killing. He's murdered for blasphemy, not against all the actual charges, but because he sees Jesus at the right hand of the Father in heaven. The contrast between Stephen, the man full of faith, and Saul, the accomplice to murder. Lots of other stuff. But there is just one point that I really do want to make, so forgive me for this. I have to say this before we leave the passage, because I hear a lot of negativity. I hear a lot of negativity, I hear a lot of fear among Christians at the moment. There's concern about shrinking church numbers, about increasing secularism in our society, anti-Christian values in the world around us, about legislative changes around euthanasia, gender issues, religious freedoms, all that stuff. There are a lot of people who are genuinely worried and in some cases genuinely scared. But I tell you what we face now is nothing compared to what they were facing then. Saul set out to destroy the church. This is the start of chapter 8. On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, and all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him, but Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. That's where our reading finished. But that's not the final word. The next section, which I didn't include in the reading, begins like this. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. But what I want to say is simply this: do not be afraid. God is in control. He uses even persecution for his purposes. Back in Acts chapter 1, Jesus told his disciples they would be his witnesses where? In Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. And where does God scatter them? Throughout Judea and Samaria. In the first 7 chapters, the church does not leave Jerusalem. And why would they? All the Christians are there. The apostles are teaching, miracles are happening. The church is well received generally. I mean, okay, there's the high priest and all of that mob, but generally they're well received. Everything's going great. Why would you leave? Why would you go anywhere? But God, in his wisdom, used persecution to accomplish his purposes. He had sent them, and so they must go. God is king of all the world and all of history. Many, many of the things we see as bad, God is already using and will use for his glory. We just haven't seen it yet. So don't be afraid. If we're thinking about defending the faith, giving an answer as Stephen was called to do, this is actually one of the most important principles. Do not be afraid, because God is in control. So for our part, while I would never say I want persecution, I do want God to shake us up a bit, to stir us out of our comfort zone. And if that means things have to get harder in the short term, That's fine. That's actually really good. Won't feel nice, but it is really good. We don't need to win. You understand that? Not up to us to win. We just need to be faithful. So, be ready to give an answer for the hope you have in Christ. Speak the truth. Smooth the way. Remove the obstacles when you can. Do not create more. Never, never apologize for the cross. And don't be afraid of opposition. Let me leave you with this from Paul's second letter to Timothy. For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. So do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord or of me, his prisoner. Rather, join with me in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. That's my prayer for us. I don't know when this will apply to you. I pray that it will. That you will have the opportunity to speak up in defense of your faith. Because it is a beautiful gift from God and an opportunity that we have to confront people. Not just to defend ourselves. And that's not the issue here. We're not defending ourselves. We're defending our faith. And bringing people the good news of the gospel. Whether that's this week, this month, next year, whenever it happens. Remember Stephen's example. Remember the promise of Jesus in Luke chapter 12. That when that happens, the Holy Spirit is with you. He will give you the words to speak. Take comfort, take encouragement, but do not flinch from that calling. Do not turn aside to the left or to the right. Press on and speak the good word. And I pray that we go in that confidence of the Lord this week. Thank you. Amen. I'm going to close there. That's it. Let me pray. And then please join us for morning tea afterwards. If you've got kids out at Kids Church, please go and make sure you sign them out. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you most of all that you are God Most High. You are God over all creation because you made it. Everything. Everything that we may face on earth. Even the people who stand against us, they are your creation as well. And in fact, you love them. They may not love you, but you love them. And so there will be opportunities in our lives when we have this opportunity to speak up, to explain to people why this love of yours, why this grace of yours, this offer of relationship through Jesus Christ is so good. Lord, thank you for that promise that when that time comes, you will be with us and give us words to speak. But help us also to remember these things. That we would not be bound up in fear, but released to speak the good news of Christ. Lord, empower us by your Spirit. We don't find this easy. It's not a habit for us anymore. We're out of practice. And the society hates it. So Lord, strengthen us, I pray. Bless and protect every person here and those online as they go out into this week. And maybe, Lord, you would open a door even this week for us to speak up, to give the reason we have for the hope that is in us, in and through Jesus Christ. Thank you, Lord, for all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, everyone.